Hi, folks. Welcome to the Yale Career Panel on Sales. My name is Justin Kostlin, Yale '09. This event is the 39th in a series providing candid views of various careers, particularly those with myths that Yale students and Yale alums sometimes consider or pursue. This series, along with a companion series of fireside chats, was started by Peter Young in March 2012, with subsequent collaboration from Trish Takamoto and Julie Sung. You can visit yalecareerpanels.com for recordings of previous sessions on a variety of topics, such as careers in law, medicine, consulting, government, fireside chats on networking, interviewing, and beyond. We'd like to thank the YAA, the Yale Office of Career Strategies, Yale Association of New York, known as Yale.NYC, the Association of Asian American Yale Alumni, Junior Class Council, and others. All those organizations helped with either the planning or the marketing of this event. Thanks. During the Q&A, for those of you who at this point in the pandemic are not yet fully mastered Zoom, you can click on the chat function at the bottom of your screen and simply type in your question. Though not all of our panelists will be able to join, there's also a networking session after our conversation on a separate platform. You can check your email for the link to the Air Meet, which is the name of that separate platform, for the networking session after this panel. All right, so today we're talking about sales. When I was on campus, sales got basically zero airtime. If anything, I was left with the vague impression that sales was just not a relevant field for me to consider. And boy, that was wrong. Sales makes the world go round. No company, no nonprofit, no organization exists without sales. Done well, sales can create huge win-wins for customers and businesses. And even if you don't go into sales as a full-time role, there's a ridiculous number of jobs in the world that include elements of sales as core requirements. So I'm really glad today that we're able to peel back the curtain a bit on sales as a discipline and as an industry. We have three panelists joining us today who represent three different kinds of sales. Adrian Ryan works with customers during and after the sales process and has incorporated consultative sales into a number of roles. Currently, he's at Antithesis Operations, which is an AI startup. Adrian studied linguistics at Yale. Alexandra Koslin is a partner in investor relations at Pershing Square, a hedge fund, where she builds long-term working relationships with strategic clients. And yes, we are married. Hello, my dear. Nina Sola is a marketing manager at Tivientas in Ecuador. I apologize for my poor pronunciation, Nina. Her work includes e-commerce and sales, and she holds a BA from Yale, as well as an MBA. As for your humble moderator, I worked at Google for about a decade and had a chance to work with a variety of sales teams. Now I'm at TED with the folks behind TED Talks. I have a BS from Yale. So for our conversation, let's get started with a few questions for our panel, and then we will turn it over to questions from our audience. Panelists, sales is a broad and complex field. As we've discussed, it ranges from consultative sales to scaled programs to long-term relationships. What are the different sorts of sales that you have experienced? What is a day in your life? Who wants to start us off? Let's go alphabetically. Adrian, over to you.
Great. First name, I guess. Right. So I work in sales engineering, so I am not a salesperson per se. I think is worth kind of talking about up front. In fact, in a lot of ways, I'm more likely to be supporting Alex and Nina than I am to be like running the show when it comes to sales overall. But the way that often works, so we have a very technical product. And selling that product involves actually showing it off to our potential customers. And in fact, often doing demos or even proof of concepts where we integrate our software into theirs so that they can see what it will look like in the real world once they're using it. And that's where my job comes in. So my job is one of building relationships, but also kind of building trust and expertise. Like a lot of my job is to help them feel that they have like an expert at this company who is going to be genuine with them, is going to like work through the issues. I also, the way that our sales are set up, in some places, the sales engineers and then the later like kind of relationship engineers are different people. That's not true at Antithesis. So I also own the relationships once we have made the sale. which is really great from my point of view, because I am building like long-term relationships with the work that I'm doing. So even though I'm an engineer, like I write code a good chunk of the day, I also have to be really invested in the people who I'm working with, build really strong connections with them, and eventually convince them that, like, they want to buy my services, they want to buy our software, and do that both through hard work and also just like the general people relationship management that one does in these situations.
Thank you. How about you, Alex?
Sure. Well, Adrian, in some ways, our jobs aren't that different. I think, you highlighted some key things. Building trust and building long-term relationships are exceptionally important in terms of, my types of sales as well. And what I generally try to do is work on building relationships with prospects as well as our existing investors. And the types of investors I have relationships. It's everything from, sovereign wealth funds, pensions, high net worth, endowments, family offices. And these are relationships that I build over time. I put a lot of years into building those relationships. And it is really a long-term investment. And I think that's a really good way to think about it. And the other thing I try to spend time on is also trying to really understand my product and become an expert in what it is that I'm selling, because you do want to be the person that they go to where they can, they have trust and confidence in terms of what it is that you're telling them.
Thank you. And how about you, Nina?
I do a little bit of, I'll just call it 360 selling. So my day is very varied. So I deal both with providers who have a wide array of products that we have to choose and decide which are the right ones for us to be able to sell in our e-commerce and in our stores. And we also deal directly with the clients through marketing. So it's a relationship on both sides. I agree with both Alex and Adrian about building trust, about long-term relationships. It's very important. And I think that one of the things I love about my job is that it really does provide, or doesn't provide, a chance for boredom. There's so many things that need to be done, so many things to be explored, innovations happening everywhere. And when you are in sales, you always have to be aware of what's going on, what's changing, where the opportunities are, and where you can grow. It's a really fast-paced career. So if you don't like getting bored, this is a good choice.
All three of you talked about building trust. Could I just get a short example from each of you of what's one concrete thing that you've done in the last couple of days that helped build that trust, just to make it really tangible for folks who aren't on the inside of that career? Adrian, let's start with you. Like, what is a concrete action you took to build the trust with a prospective or current client?
Yeah, currently right now for one of the clients that I'm working on getting, we're essentially building new functionality into our software just for them. It's something that they need specifically. And in terms of, that is kind of us overall building the trust. In terms of like me in particular, one thing I try to do is really not overpromise that, give them really, like let them know that, like, hey, this might not work, right? Like, this is new stuff that we're building. We have to do a research project to make it work. Like, we can promise that we'll try and we'll move it forward, but also just be really honest about where our situation is. We're a startup. They tend to trust, right? Like, this is this sort of like not trying to pretend to be someone we're not. We are not Google, right? We're not TED. We are like 20 people working in various bedrooms.
How about you, Alex?
I guess one way is building trust. It's I just call people just to keep them informed. I don't necessarily expect anything from them. I just want them to know what's going on at the fund, and I just want to keep them updated. And I think when you do that, when you don't have a particular ask, and you do that consistently to build the relationship, I think that really helps build trust.
Adding on to what Adrian said, I think that underpromise, overdeliver is really important when you're in sales. For example, in my case, when I'm working with the e-commerce platform, it's really important for the customer to find the information that they need to be able to learn and understand that we are going to deliver what we're offering. Especially, I work in a third world country, so here easy to find companies that will overpromise. So it's really important as a company and as a salesman and directly to be able to deliver exactly what you offer and be able to respond. For example, there's lots of customers who like to make your life impossible. I don't know if there's a saying in English. Yeah, there is. The customer's always right. So not always true, but you do have to find a way to mitigate those problems, to solve them in such a way that you're not directly telling the person, hey, you're wrong, but giving a solution that is both positive for the company and also solving the problem of the customer. So that's always a fun challenge.
And for me personally, that was the biggest misunderstanding I had about sales. And it's kind of embarrassing to admit this, but I didn't realize that sales is problem solving and that sales is communicating and that sales is being transparent and honest, and that sales is trying to have long-term integrity. And so I think that the examples you shared are great illustrations of that. What does the full sales cycle look like? You know, what is the full range of expertises that play a role in this process? Maybe we'll go in reverse this time, starting with you, Nina.
Sure. When I was looking over the questions for the session today, I was like, I'm going to get really technical, but no, I'm not. No one's going to get it. And but in my case, I'm going to go a little bit more towards the personal side. There are so many aspects and so many steps that have to be taken to conclude a sale. So, for example, like I was saying, we start at the one end where you have the relationship with providers and trying to find where the demand is or what the future innovations or what the future products that clients may want are going to be. So you have that side of sales where you're looking for the particular products, the particular services that your customers are going to need. There's the whole process of determining prices, of market research, of product placement. And in our case, we also develop products. So it's really interesting to see the prototypes, see how they test them, how they work. All these research points are very important. Then there's a whole nother aspect, which is stores. In our stores, the merchandising, depending on where you place the product, what area of the store is visited the most. And this is a whole nother aspect, a whole nother career within sales. Then there's the salesmen themselves or saleswomen. And now e-commerce is such a big part in Ecuador, again, third world country. It's just starting, but it's a whole nother range of new activities that need to be done. There's big data, there's the whole interface, programming. There's so many things that need to be taken care of. And of course, the most important thing from my point of view, which is the customer relationship and being able to deliver what the customer expects.
Thank you. How about you, Alex?
Great. So I guess ours is on a different end of the spectrum because I don't sell any stuff. We sell a fund and we have investors. So what we do is, have a relationship with a prospect. I could be in touch with them for years before they do anything. But if they do become engaged, we'll probably have more frequent phone calls, talk more about the portfolio. And then there'll be a whole due diligence process. And I think this was mentioned earlier. I think talk about, making sure that you don't overpromise and underdeliver. That's when we have to pull in our legal side, to help with some legal paperwork. We have to pull in our accounting and finance team, to help pull some numbers together for us. So we have a lot of the organization, is really working on this process together with sales. So you have to know how to work with all aspects of our organization. And then once that cycle is completed, then you have a client and then you work on building and maintaining that relationship. I think it's really important to consider that once you have a client, you don't just move on, that's something that really has to be maintained and you have to think about it long term.
And Adrian, please, as well.
Yeah, so we do B2B sales, enterprise sales in particular. And so our sales process is really long and I don't touch all of it. There's like the prospecting and figuring out who to talk to in the first place. we have two salespeople, and they are very relationship-driven salespeople. Like, they know a lot of people, and a lot of what they're doing is just building relationships in an organization first before it ever gets to demoing the software or anything like that. The demos and the proof of concepts are where I come in, and these can last a very long time. The one I'm working on right now, I started on the project, I think, like 5 months ago, and it had been a project like at least 5 months prior to that. And so we're talking oftentimes, 6 months minimum to sell one of our products, frequently a year or more than a year. And, a lot of that, like, that process involves everything from, security reviews, right? Like the other end of the legal side of, like, our customers saying, like, hey, can you actually do what you've promised for us? As well as this kind of piece of, like, proving that out in the use case with our actual, there's this difference in enterprise sales between the like buyer and the user of the software. Like, the company is the customer. A different person is probably buying it than is going to use it, and we have to convince both those parties that it's something to do. So we usually try to get into the user, show them how great it is, and have them try to convince the buyer instead of us trying to convince the buyer, because that's a much more trusted party internally to the company than I am.
I think the problem maybe is that we need Alec Baldwin to do a new sales movie where instead of, trying to prey on, vulnerable whatever individuals, and get them to buy something that's not valuable, he should spend 6 months negotiating a complex contract that genuinely solves the customer's problem. And maybe that would address the any lingering confusion that folks have about what sales is and isn't.
I've seen some folks do that too, to be fair.
So
not personally, but.
So does anyone want to share how you got into sales? What is a typical path through sales? Any of the three, just jump in, popcorn style.
Sure, I'll go first. I had genuinely no idea what I wanted to do when I graduated. So it was a really scary big world. There's too many doors. You don't know which one to knock on or open. So I basically just knew that I loved marketing. I actually was a psychology major, and I loved the power of convincing people. And so when I first started, I actually just started looking at marketing, looking at publicity, what goes into it. And little by little, I found myself switching from marketing to sales, which are very, very related. I don't want to say they're the same thing, but I found a great balance in it, and I sort of stumbled into it. And now that I'm here, I really like what it has taught me, because if not, I wouldn't have been able to see this world of new products, new innovations, new opportunities. And I feel like we're always involved in learning about how the world is changing, where it's going. And like you said, sales is everything. No matter what you're doing, somehow you're involved in it. So it's an interesting place to be.
Well, I don't know if my path is a typical one, but my background was I was an art history major. I had dreams of doing something in the art world that actually paid you money. So I thought I was going to go into art insurance and eventually become an art consultant one day. But my job fell through, and I decided to move to New York and had to pay the bill somehow. So I decided to temp at a financial firm, because I learned when you temp at financial firms, they'll pay you twice as much to answer the phone, for any students that are listening. So I showed up at a hedge fund pre-launch for a day, and I knew how to answer phone calls, which was intriguing to the person running the fund, and asked them about my background. And I told him I was an art history major. I said, why don't you help us out? We're about to launch a hedge fund. So first I had to figure out what a hedge fund was. And then, but I showed up the next day and just started helping out around the office. And if my boss was running late for a meeting, I'd spend the first 15 minutes with that person. I'd start returning phone calls to people that I got along with well on the phone. And, 16 years later, I'm still at the same place. So, I think what I did not know I wanted to be in sales, but I always knew I loved people. I like talking to people. I like being on the phone. I like being helpful. So it all kind of naturally came together.
Every time you tell that story, it makes me smile. It always reminds me of The Princess Bride too. They sort of dread Pirate Roberts, one more day. How about you, Adrian?
Yeah, so I would say, like I still don't know if I do sales. Like I do sometimes. I wouldn't consider myself a salesperson in other ways, but like in so much as I am, it's really through being an entrepreneur. Like I've worked in the kind of startup realm my entire career. I've started some companies. I've been a freelance management consultant. I think particularly freelancing, like your job is to sell yourself, right? Like you have to be comfortable like getting clients and telling them like I'm going to do this stuff for you and convincing them that like, it's not just a product, it's actually like you personally are someone that they should trust and like spend a lot of money on. And then two, all the early stage startups I've worked at, whether it's an early employee or founding it, like everyone at an early stage startup has to sell in some way or another, whether it is like helping out with investor decks, whether it is, going to pitch meetings, whether it is, just like talking to your friends because like you need to hire another developer. And like, that's a sales process too, right? Like at an early startup, like you probably can't offer as much money. So you have to sell like the idea of what it is you're building and the like culture of where you're working and the like wanting to be on that team. So it's just kind of a thing I've always had to do. Never been super comfortable doing it, frankly. And turns out like in this kind of role, it's great because I can both code and like talk to people and not have to do like anything 100% of the time.
Wonderful. All right, so we're going to do a lightning round. I want just a few words from each of you on what are the characteristics of people who tend to do well and are happy in sales. So try to really just come down to like 3 or 4 words. When you think about the folks you've met who've done well in sales, what are the characteristics that they have? Whoever's ready, go first.
Comfortable with risk.
I would say outgoing, comfortable with risk, definitely, and creative.
I'd say, yeah, also definitely outgoing. I'll add comfortable with risk, and also I think wanting to help others.
Why comfortable with risk? All 3 of you said that.
Any deal might fall through at any point. Like if you can't be comfortable knowing that like you're supposed to sign tomorrow and it still might not happen, it can be stressful, and you just have to like kind of like be aware that not everything is in your hands.
I think in some ways
There's
it's
a
also of rejection too, right? Because you're talking to a lot of people, and I guess it's kind of like dating. Some will work out, some won't,
Yes.
and you have to be okay with that.
Yes, exactly. And there's a lot of negotiating going on. So you have to be comfortable giving a little bit and losing a little bit and taking a little bit, a lot like dating. Exactly.
All right, another lightning round, this time the inverse. Folks who don't do well in sales. Few words.
Shy, uncomfortable with risk, and very, I don't want to say organized, but methodical. You have to be willing to have a little flexibility. So if you're too square, not for you.
Yeah, I was going to say that like a lack of flexibility or a lack of being able to like roll with the punches.
Yeah, I was thinking if you're thinking about being an actuary, then maybe, that might be the other end of the spectrum. Though actually, I'd like to add one other thing to that, because I was thinking about that question as well in terms of sales. In terms of, it's not a personal characteristic, but I also think you really have to believe in your product. Because I think people who don't do well in sales, what I found, it's often people who end up selling a product that they personally don't believe in. And I think that comes through. And you don't have to sell the sexiest product in the world, but I do think you have to believe in it. And I think your potential clients will be able to read that if you don't believe in it.
Great point.
Absolutely.
Really good point. So what are the myths versus the realities of sales as an industry?
I'm not sure I've ever heard of a myth. But
Maybe
something
that
else,
it is an industry.
Well, I was actually thinking of your Alec Baldwin reference earlier, that, you know, everyone is a total shark. You know, I don't think that's necessarily true. I think that a lot of people do appreciate the people that you really can build genuine, trusting, long-term relationships with.
Mhm, mhm.
Nice.
yeah, good point.
For folks on the call, I have one more question on my end, and then we'll be opening it up. So feel free to start putting your questions in, if you don't mind, in the text fields, and then we'll be able to address them as a panel. But my last question is, if you don't stay in sales until retirement, what are the exit routes to other professions?
I mean, I think entrepreneurship is one frequent one, right? Like a lot of folks can go and, you know, maybe not be a CEO of a large company, but the CEO of a small company is largely about doing sales and raising money, which is just another form of sales. And hiring people, which is a third form of sales. So it's a great skill to have if that's something that you want to go after.
Marketing as well, and everything digital, e-commerce, even though that is a form of sell. Everything in the end is a form of sell.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with Adrian and Nina. I mean, anything, you're right, anything entrepreneurial, anything on the strategy side, anything on the business side. I mean, I think it's a pretty translatable skill set.
Wonderful. And we've got our first audience question in the Q&A Blue Jeans feature. Will the recording be available? Yes. So easy question to answer. We have a question here. How do you realize you need to hand off sales responsibly? Can you clarify that question, Philip?
I think that's responsibility.
Oh, responsibility. Thank you. Thank you, Adrian, for reading more correctly than I did. So responsibility. Go for it, Adrian. You volunteered yourself to answer the question.
Great. I mean, for me, it's easy because like there's an actual salesperson, like, you know, it is a sales guy. His name is Hal. He, you know, at some point he tells me like, Adrian, I think it's time to make the sale. And I say, great, you go talk to the executives and I will keep talking with my people, you know, and like convince them too. So, you know, it's one of the nice things about being in, frankly, what is a support role is that like, you know, there are, it's not like clear delineations of roles or anything like that, so much as like we all have different skills that we're good at, and like being really self-aware of like, I'm good at building like individual relationships. I'm not necessarily great at negotiating. I don't like doing it. You know, I've been in a career where I've had to do it a number of times. I don't love doing it, and I'm happy to let people who do love doing it like go do it. And so I think some of that is like self-knowledge, building up your own self-awareness of what it is that you like to do and are good at, because those two things are often like come together. It is really important in this kind of industry to like recognize your own limitations and where you're great at things, and like, you know, be aware of both those.
And I think it's also really important to be able to identify when you have chemistry with a customer, because there's times, regardless of your negotiating abilities or your strengths or weaknesses, there's times that the customer just isn't the right fit for you. So that's an important skill to develop.
We got a great question here that I'm curious what the three of you think. Do you see a difference in characteristics needed for short-term sales, by which they mean selling one-time products, versus long-term sales, like investment products, i.e. quick hits versus relationship management? I mean, I think all three of you spoke about an element of relationship management in every sales process, but is there a fundamental distinction between, you know, what Alex was saying with a 2-year sales cycle versus maybe, Nina, some of what you were saying with e-commerce, where it's a little more transactional?
Yes, a lot. I can just share something that we experienced. We sell products, anything from a blender to a dog bed or a chew toy. So it's very simple. The customer comes, they want it, they buy it, they take it, it's theirs. But we decided to try out selling insurance. And to make a long story short, we realized that all our salesmen in the stores, all our people in the call center were horrible at it because they weren't used to having these long conversations with the customers, sort of becoming part of their problem, understanding it, and it just did not work out. So I do think there's definitely two different types of skill sets needed, and also two separate learning curves that need to be explored for both types of products. And I don't think one is easier than the other one, but I do think they both have their unique challenges.
That's a great case study. Alex, Adrian, do you have anything you want to add on that theme?
I've never done the shorter sales, so no, not really. I know that I don't know how to do it, to Nina's point.
Yeah, I know the long game, but I think Nina made some great points though, and it does seem like it's certainly a different skill set.
Another question for the group. Who are the thought leaders in the world of sales that you follow or look to for mentorship or guidance? If you can each just maybe name one or two people, it could be someone whose book you read. It doesn't need to be someone you have a personal relationship with, but where's the place that you get the best advice on how to do whatever forms of sales you've been involved in your careers?
Yeah, I can. So the only book I've ever read on sales, I could maybe just full stop, frankly, is Getting More by Stuart Diamond. It's a book specifically on negotiation, and it's not really a sales book. It's like a negotiation kind of like more broadly book. But I really like it because it really focuses, like one of the key insights of it is right, like this idea of trading things of unequal value. So like one thing to look at is like you have something that's more valuable to the customer than what they have, which is like probably money, maybe is something else depending on the negotiation. And thinking about it that way of like you're not taking from them, you're each giving something that's less valuable to you and is more valuable to the other person, and trying to think of negotiations that way. So I really like that book. I've used it like far beyond sales, and honestly, I don't know that I follow any thought leaders beyond having like read a book or two, though.
Alex, Nina?
One book that I read that I feel like is must read for people who go into sales is Good to Great, but I think a lot of people just read it in general. It's a book that I definitely would recommend. And I'm trying to remember the author of a book I read. It's more geared towards women. I think the title is The Myth of the Nice Girl. I don't know. Maybe we can put it in the comments if I figure out the title of it. But it's basically coming back to what Alex said, not everybody's a shark. And I feel that one of my biggest insecurities when I went into sales was that I'm so nice. I mean, I just can't imagine myself. And I have a lot of trouble dealing with people who think that the only way to get the seller, the only way to deal with the customers to be bigger and badder. And that book really helped me sort of land and get over my fear.
I also have fond memories of Good to Great. I was actually thinking about that one too.
One that I would also add is Made to Stick, which is really, it's a book on communication, but I think communication is so central really to both kinds of shit, both the short term and the long term, that I found that the frameworks that it recommends to be really useful. All right, so I have an anonymous question, which you may want to answer anonymously if there was a way to do that, which is what mistakes did you make early on in your career? And how has your sales strategy evolved over time?
Oh goodness, what mistakes we're gonna have? Can we go for like 3 days? A lot of examples here.
For real.
But I think that Adrian had a good point. Knowing your weaknesses, I am not good at negotiating. It's not my strong point, though I've had to learn how to do it. I do think it's important, regardless of how good you are at it. You do need to learn and practice. But I've definitely had a lot of things, made a lot of sales where later I've thought about it and digested it and realized that I really just essentially gave away what I'm selling. Here they have a saying that's, you don't buy bread to sell bread. In other words, you have to value the product you have for what it is. And if you can't value the product, or you you're not able to do it, then you're going to lose a lot. And unfortunately, in my case, that's something that happened to me quite a few times during the beginning. Not anymore. Oh, another very important one is discounts. Discounts are so tempting, especially when you're in retail. And especially in the United States, I think it's, if you do an MBA outside of the United States, maybe in the United States as well, they teach you about they call it the black spiral in Spanish. I'm not sure what they call it in English. The death spiral, I think it's called, where you start giving discounts and essentially your product just becomes valued at what the discount price is. And if you look a lot of case studies in the States, like Gap, for example, Gap is always on sale. And if it's not on sale, you can even look on the internet. Am I getting swindled if I buy full price clothes? And they'll just answer yes. So that's another mistake I made a few times. Found the discount was selling twice as much and then realized that I essentially had just burned out the product and that I couldn't sell it again.
It's the old line, we lose money on every sale, but we'll make up for it in volume.
Yep.
How about you, Alex and Adrian?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about like over promising and under delivering before, and like I have definitely done that. That's a hard lesson learned over time, that like telling people like, yeah, it'll be great when you don't know it will be, right? Like just to try to get the sale, or to try to like make your boss happy, or like, yeah, it'll totally be done by this time. Like whatever it is, like that's, it's like short term maybe gets you what you want like right now, but in the medium and long term, it can be very harmful and, kind of like burn your credibility.
Yeah, no, actually, I agree with that one too. I think, right, like promising, assuming you'll be able to get a certain, RFP or whatever done in a particular amount of time, or whatever it might be, and not being able to do that and not being able to manage that, I think is something that I've also learned over time. And you're right, also knowing when you need to actually ask for help and bring in other constituents that you work with is also a key thing to be aware of.
Yeah, asking for help is like not a weakness in this industry, even though I think it often gets kind of like framed that way.
Sales is a team sport.
Mm-hmm.
So we got two questions that are related. I'm going to combine them. One of the questions is, how does one decide whether to pursue a career as an individual salesperson or move into sales management? And the other is, are there career progression opportunities in sales? So talk to me about the career path as you've seen it, as you've experienced, as you've seen others do it. As you grow in sales, do you become a more senior individual salesperson? Do you take on management? How does that work?
In my case, in my experience, I think sales is one of the easiest ways to learn a lot about the company where you are at. In fact, a lot of high-ranking people, CEOs, from conversations I've had, always insist that before their children work for their family company or their relatives start working for the family company, they actually start out as direct salesmen in their stores or in their e-commerces or wherever they are, because it's the only way to really feel or to experience what is the motor of the company. If there aren't sales, there is no company. So it doesn't matter if you go into the finance department, if you're the CEO, it doesn't matter what you do, but if there aren't sales, there is no company. So I feel like if you start in sales, you open doors to any path you want to go to, regardless of if you studied psychology or if you studied, I don't know, physics. There's a great amount of stuff to learn, and all the doors open. And I've known people who have gone from sales to CEO, or from sales to staying in sales. There's also a lot of hierarchy within the own sales department. So I think it's a wonderful way to have a career that is going to have doors open to advance within the same company or others if you want to change.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of room for growth, because I think we're using sales as a very broad term here. I'd say, for my own example, I'd say when I started, what I was doing was much more just client service oriented. helping with everything from documents, answering their questions. And then over time, also as the business grew, I was able to grow along with that business, and it became more of a sales role. So it was more, actually, pitching the actual product and, keeping people posted on what was going on in the portfolio, and actually, being responsible for closing the sales and managing all aspects of the relationship. So I agree. I think one of the nice things about it is it's a field where there's a lot of room for growth.
And I will say to the first question about like, how do you know whether you want to go into management or like, become a better individual salesperson? Like this is undergraduates listening for the most part, right? Like, don't worry about that yet, quite frankly. Like, get the job, do the job. You will learn that over time. That's, I think, part of what we talked about of like knowing yourself really well, is like also understanding, do I like managing people? Do I like going out and getting the sale, right? Like, obviously, like with the individual sales thing, you sell bigger and bigger and like more intense products, and you like make more money doing it, especially commissions-based sales. And so that's a very clear kind of entryway, but just because you're a good salesperson doesn't mean you're going to be a very good sales manager. And I think the flip side, just because you're like, a mediocre salesperson doesn't mean that you can't actually like really like galvanize a team together. So I think that's a lot of stuff that you have to, it's not like someone's going to ask you day one, like, hey, 5 years from now, are you going to be managing teams or like selling bigger projects? You can like go into that and figure it out on your own as you go.
We do also have alumni in the mix, Adrian, but I think your point is
Okay.
well taken, that I think, some of it is like any other industry. You have to put a foot or two down each road and get a feel for what it's like. All right, switching gears, question. What are strategies you use to connect with cold prospects, and have those strategies changed because of COVID?
I don't do any cold prospecting, so I'll just bow out. Yeah.
I generally at this point try not to make it too cold in terms of a new prospect. I usually try to see who in my network might also know them. So it's a little bit warmer. But if it's somebody that I don't really know, I just try to be open, friendly, and I'd say don't lead with the sale. Just try to get to know the person a little bit more and understand who you're working with, understand what they're interested in, understand if there's somebody who's gonna wanna hear from you, or maybe they just want to talk to you. A lot of people just want someone who will listen to them. So just like be able to get to learn the client for the first couple minutes, and then go from there.
I'm gonna have to side with Adrian. I don't do cold prospecting. So
All right, question for me. I realize we've been talking about sales for 40 minutes and we haven't defined it. Could I get from each of you a short definition of what sales is?
getting money in return for something.
Selling products.
That's basically, I once was asked this question, and with a room of everybody was a high-ranking management, and they gave us like 10 minutes, and everybody came up with these elaborate answers. And in the end, the person who was giving the conferences laughed at us and was like, no, you're just asking for money for something that you have. And I think that's the best way to define it.
Any additional definitions?
No, I kind of agree. It's like we've talked about the stuff that you do towards that goal, right? And it's not just, you don't just sit down and be like, hey, I have a thing, can you give me a bunch of money for it? There's a lot of stuff towards that goal. But I think that is the goal at the end of the day. It's, like, I don't know what else to define it as.
All right, we're gonna
guide someone towards a product, and making sure everybody that they now and you want them to want that product.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
wanting them to want.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we're going to do one last question, and then we are going to flip over to the air meet for anyone who would like to join a little bit of mingling. The last question, with thanks to Philip, is how do you handle organization issues that impede sales activity? So we've talked about sales as a team sport. What do you do when the full team isn't on the field, or someone has a twisted ankle, or whatever metaphor you prefer?
Yeah, I can talk about this like a little bit because like I do kind of fit between like the actual salesperson and the engineering team. And, you know, like especially as a startup, you have to like think about who you're selling to and whether a deal is like right for you as the startup. And this is like a conversation even amongst the salespeople, right? Like we don't want to oversell ourselves. And we're only 20 people, right? Like we can only do so much. But I think oftentimes there's like, you know, more pushback from engineering on like what we can do, but also this desire for sales and for, you know, the professional services team to somewhat insulate engineering from the sales and from the customers. Like we want them to be able to like sit and work and think about really hard problems without having to like do crunch for a customer, right? Like that's my job, is to do the crunch so that they don't have to, quite frankly. And so, you know, I don't know, like, is it impeding sales activity, or is it like coming together as like an entire team to understand like what the organization can actually like bring on, and like what are, you know, short-term versus medium-term and long-term goals? I guess in some ways that's what I'm saying, is like I would kind of like flip that question and like try to like reframe it as like understanding who has what goals.
It's a very good salesperson approach. Alex, Marina?
I think that I'm not exactly sure what to answer the question with, but all I can say is it's very important to have your goals clear. And it may seem like selling is very simple, but if all the team doesn't have the final objective clear, which is this is the product and we're going to get money for it, and we don't need to get the exact same money back, we actually need to make money off of it. And of course, everything involved. So making the goal clear and the process clear and making sure everybody knows what their particular position is within the process is important, so that you're not stepping on each other's toes.
Maybe this is an adjacent answer to the question, but what I was thinking about is also with sales, it's not just external, but it's also making sure you have good relationships with the other groups within your organization, so that when you do need something rushed, or if you're, you know, a little short-staffed or whatever else is going on, that what you're working on can hopefully be towards the top of the pile as well.
Excellent. Well, I want to give a huge round of applause to our panelists, especially my lovely wife, but I suppose also Adrian and Nina. This was an eye-opening, very helpful exploration. Thank you to everyone who asked questions as well. I think that sales really glues the world together. That'd be maybe my definition of sales. Glues organizations internally, glues recruiting, to Adrian's earlier point, glues, you know, organizations to their clients, to their donors, to their investors. And so that glue is, you know, it's just, you can't have the world without the glue. And I thank you for shining a light on that today. As I mentioned at the beginning, we do have a brief mingling session for folks who want to do a little bit of networking. There should be a link in your inboxes for AirMeet. So feel free to give that a go. And thank you again, and good luck to everybody in the world today. Stay safe out there, everyone.
Thank you,
Thanks, Justin.
Thanks, Justin.